Hey, morning everyone, and welcome to the fourth edition of InsureTalk, the online insurance conference that really allows you to connect with industry experts and each other, of course, without leaving the safety of your home. So much has happened in this past month, let alone since the pandemic struck. I mean, we've gone from not drinking to not drinking again. Lockdown is almost becoming like the life story of Keith Richards. In other news, the IMF has agreed to give us a $4 billion bailout by month end to help ease the financial pain that is adversely affecting the lifestyle of so many of our tenderpreneurs in South Africa. And on a positive note, inflation is lower than it has been in 15 years, 2.1%. Yes, you heard that right. The number is as low as it was in 2004. And here's a strange fact you can Google. In July 2004, the first cases of avian bird flu were recorded in South Africa. Is there a link between viruses and inflation? You be the judge of that. I'm your MC, Simon Coleman, and this is InsureTalk4, sponsored by Santam Insurance. And we thank them, of course, for making this event possible. And to you, our audience, thanks so much for taking the time to join us as we unpack some very important issues as we move further into our new relatively unlocked down world. So today we're going to be looking at scenario planning in an unknown future, followed by a regular update from the IISA, and then really taking a peek at the impact of the pandemic on the global reinsurance market. Then we'll have some gastronomical entertainment from the Josie Secret Chef, and we'll be looking at the role of insurance and proper risk management in a changing world. After that, we unpack some of the complexities in enterprise risk management, and then there'll be a talk on the rise of digitalization in the insurance industry. And that's really important, of course, as we navigate our new normal. There's also, as usual, a lucky draw today, and we'll announce the winner just after the talks finish at around about 12:45. And there should be time for a Q&A session, although what we have noticed in previous events that if something pops up, rather use the Zoom chat button during the presentations. If you're watching this on YouTube, you can use the chat facility there. And just make sure you address your question to the speaker so that they can respond during the course of the event in writing. And a reminder, of course, that this is accredited for 2.5 CPD hours through the IISA. So please stay tuned in the entire time and pay attention. We're obliged to use some secret spy technology to make sure you haven't disappeared into your inbox during the discussions. And so it gives me great pleasure to welcome our first speaker of the day, Professor Andre Roux. He'll be chatting to us about scenario planning in an unknown future. Andre is the economist and head of the Future Studies program at the University of Stellenbosch's Business School. Over to you, Andre.
Thank you very much, and good morning to everybody out there in cyberspace. I've been told I have 25 minutes. I should perhaps point out, as you just heard, I am an economist. There are three kinds of economists, those who can count and those who cannot. So I hope I do stick to my 25 minutes. I'm going to go straight into my screen sharing function because time is clearly of the essence, as they say. And I am going to assume you can see that. Can you just confirm that, please, Simon? Is it visible? You can see my screen? Anybody?
Yep, we can.
All right, right. So let me kick off by sharing the following with you. Back in 1901, a certain gentleman proclaimed, "Man will not fly for at least another 50 years. 2 years later, obviously then 1903, the man who uttered those words, Wilbur Wright, did indeed successfully fly an aeroplane. In 1940, the New York Times had a look at a brand new thing called television and proclaimed the following: "The problem with this thing is that people must sit and keep their eyes glued to the screen, and the average American family simply hasn't got time for that." And more or less the same time, 1939, Albert Einstein proclaimed, "There's not the slightest indication that nuclear energy will ever be obtainable." And then finally, just to conclude this list of failures, In the early 1960s, a certain record company said, "We don't like their sound. Guitar music is on its way out. We don't want the Beatles as our clients." And in 1981, a certain well-known gentleman said, 640K ought to be enough for anybody. And that was the man himself, Bill Gates. So these are some examples of where a number of so-called experts in their own fields, were spectacularly wrong. And we ask ourselves, why? Are they so ignorant? Were they so ignorant, ill-informed? Why were they wrong? And there's a number of possible reasons. One is they were simply not able or willing to suspend disbelief. Another possible reason is they were guilty of extrapolation, simply looking at the past and assuming that the past will repeat itself into the future. In some cases, they got stuck into perhaps one specific prophecy, and they were perhaps also victims of what some people might call the destiny instinct. In other words, the basic idea that our innate characteristics determine the destinies of people and countries. It's the idea that things stay as they are for inescapable reasons. They've always been that way, and they will in future always be that way. Why this rather dramatic introduction? Well, what I want to kick off talking about is what is the future? Or perhaps more importantly, what is it not? How do we, how should we, or how should we not think about the future? And bear in mind that our relationship with the future is at the best of times ambivalent and troubled. So, for instance, we crave to know more about the future very often, but at the same time, we fear what we may discover. We often fear change, but if we fear change, it means we fear the future. And the risk there is we might develop a so-called dystopian view of the future, the opposite of utopian. And the risk there is if we all have a dystopian view of the future, we act accordingly, and the future might end up being rather dystopian. And yet, if you think about it, we spend far more time thinking about the future than the past, whether that be in our daily lives, our personal lives, our family lives, our social lives, and of course, our place of work lives, our business lives. We think about the future when it comes to strategy formulation. So these few opening words, excuse me, are telling us that we should see the future as that space and time which is yet to happen. We certainly cannot predict the future. In fact, when we do think about the future, there are a number of basic ground rules. Here are some of them. I've just made this point. We cannot predict the future. No mere mortal has scientific facts about what is yet to happen. We cannot say with 100% certainty that X, Y, or Z is going to happen. There's more than one future. When we think about the future, we should actually talk about the futures. There's more than one possible outcome, more than one possible way in which different futures may unfold. Ironically and frustratingly, the future actually never arrives. If we were to reflect upon what might happen tomorrow at 10 o'clock, right now, 10 o'clock tomorrow is the future. By the time it's 10 o'clock tomorrow, it is no longer the future. And then, very importantly, in days gone by, when people did think about the future, they often made the assumption that history will simply repeat itself. And so those who gazed into the future took a long time looking at historical trends and patterns and assumed that those trends and patterns would indeed repeat themselves. Today we have to say history may repeat itself, but do not take this for granted. There's bound to be, and we have many examples of that, of so-called trend breaks. Historical trends get broken. By the way, does not mean to say we should not look at history. History is very useful. We can learn from history, but don't take a repetition of the past into the future for granted. What's exciting about thinking about the future is it is actually the only space and time that we can influence, if we wish to. It's the only space and time. We cannot influence what has happened in the past, whether that be 500 years ago, 10 years ago, or 2 minutes ago. It's happened, for better or for worse. And then another very important ground rule for thinking about the future is we must think audaciously. Do not, as I said a bit earlier, do not say that something is impossible. Think holistically and think systematically. By all of this, I mean, people very often think about the future of, let's say, technology, the future of computers. The risk is that we are too blinkered. When we think about the future of computers, we need to think in a much broader sense. We need to think about the economic environment, the social environment, the political environment, and many more. And we need to, very importantly, try to trace the links between all these different forces. I think one of my favorite quotes, which I think covers many of the things I've said so far, is that by a certain gentleman called Kees van Hayden. And he once said, "The complex nature of change means that predicting events is impossible. In fact, it's quite likely to be dangerous. It implies inflexibility. It means you become locked into one specific prophecy." So if I put on my economics hat, if I were to forecast an economic growth rate next year of 2.76%, chances are it will not be 2.76%. However, if organizations and companies base their thinking and their strategic decision making on the assumption of 2.76%, therefore their strategy might be totally inappropriate. So, perhaps a disappointing fact, we cannot predict the future. So what then are we doing when we look into the future? Well, van der Hayden helps us out here again. He goes on to say, those words in yellow, of much greater value is the ability to recognize what he calls dots on the horizon. If you like, those dots on the radar screen. What does he mean by that? The signs of change that will affect every single organization. Big ones and small ones and rich ones and poor ones and developed and developing ones. So there's our first major, if you like, task as we look into the future. What's happening out there in the big wide world? The second major task, understand the significance of those signs of change. What stories, and please note my plural, what stories are they telling us? And then thirdly, once we figured that out, how do we then adapt? What do we do as an organization, as an entity, to at least survive the effects of those stories, but preferably to thrive or prosper from those stories? I've taken the liberty not of rewriting his words, but just summarizing it in the form of 3 questions that we need to answer. So the dots on the horizon, we're asking the question, what is going on out there in the big wide world? The significance, so what? Big deal. What's it telling us? And the third question to answer, now what? What are we going to do about what we've discovered from these signs of change and the stories they are telling us? In many ways, we could say, in a nutshell, this is what futurists should be doing. Excuse me. When I talk about dots on the horizon, you know the story. We look for these dots all over the place, including what we could call the contextual environment. So imagine you have an entity, an organization in the middle, a concern it might have about the future, an issue. That issue, that entity, will of course be influenced by things that it cannot control. But it must be aware of these things. It must be aware of the influence of economics, the influence of politics and rules and regulations. It must be aware of the influence of technology, the influence of the social environment, which, by the way, is a mouthful in its own right. Here we're looking at anything ranging from family values, religion, language, human development, population size, population growth, crime, education, healthcare. All of these things are part of the social environment. We have the resource environment. So we need to understand what's going on in each one of these areas, but even as importantly, we need to understand how they all influence each other. Sometimes in ways that could be unexpected. Sometimes a small change in one area might exert a major influence on one or more of the other areas. And of course, In the world in which we're currently living and have been for some time, namely an integrated world, a globalized world of 218 countries, we need to understand these things from a global perspective, from a regional perspective. In the case for most of us, that would be, let's say, Africa. From a country perspective, let's say South Africa, even a provincial, municipal perspective. So we end up with this mass, this booming, buzzing mass. Not just a mass, it's a mess. And from this mess, we then need to try to distill those particular forces that we believe are particularly relevant and important for the entity and the issue that we are concerned with. So I've just given you a 10 or so 15-minute crash course, which normally in terms of an academic course would take about a year, on what the future is all about, how we should or should not think about the future. One of the better known tools, not the only one, by the way, one of the better known tools in trying to make some sense of all of this, in talking about different futures, is, of course, the tool known as scenarios. It's interesting that in South Africa's case, the country as a whole has been engaging in and doing scenarios since the early 1970s. And to this day, you often find in academic literature, international academic literature, any reference or any article about scenarios will at least have a footnote referencing and recognizing the fact that we are past masters in some ways in using scenarios. The problem is that sometimes people use scenarios for the wrong reasons. They don't apply anywhere and everywhere and at all times. When are they particularly useful? When, but boring the statement, when you're looking for a description of some future situation. I must again stress, they are not predictions. A scenario is not a prediction of the future, but a possible sketch or outline of the future. The aim really is to orientate ourselves with regard to possible future developments, having looked at certain key factors that are relevant. And this is where they really come into their own right, where in the world of uncertainty, and by the way, the world's always uncertain, the future's always uncertain. It might seem to be more uncertain these days than before, but this particular talk I'm doing right now could have been just as relevant 3 years ago, 5 years ago, and indeed in 5 years' time. We always confronted by future uncertainty. And scenarios come into their own right when there are a wide range of factors to be considered. Some of them might be measurable, some of them might be quantitative, some might be qualitative, some might be based on subjective opinions. So a real huge wide range of factors have to be considered, and there is a great deal of uncertainty about the future. That is when scenarios come into their own right. Sometimes scenarios are used as a goal-setting function. The classic story is that of back in the early 1960s, when J.F. Kennedy, President of the USA, stated he wishes to see America landing someone on the moon by the end of that decade. That was kind of a goal-setting scenario. I want that to happen, now make it happen. And in the world of business, and indeed general policy making, scenarios are used to assist us in making decisions and to assist us in formulating strategies. I have found in the last 25 years, dealing with businesses and organizations, that increasingly one of the inputs used in a strategy formulation session is indeed scenarios. Not the only one, but certainly one of them. I do not want to bore you with long drawn out theoretical conversations about scenarios, but I want to give you a practical, quick overview of the basic steps that we use in coming up with the scenario exercise. And the reason I'm doing this is because sometimes scenarios are done not always for the right reasons. So there you see the first crucial basic step, if you like. What is the issue that we are concerned about? What is giving us sleepless nights? What is giving us nightmares? Well, either one or the other, sleepless nights or nightmares. So I suppose you can have both simultaneously. Often an organization will phone me, contact me, and ask me to assist them with a scenario exercise. And my first immediate response is yes. Why? If the answer is we've never done one before, or we haven't done one for a long time, that's not a very good reason. You only embark upon an exercise if there's a real reason to do so. As I say, if something is really keeping you awake at night. Once you've established that, then there are various steps one needs to follow. A first step is normally to think about, as a scenario team, the driving forces, those things that will have an influence on the issue and concern that has been agreed upon. And by the way, the issue concern is one part of the first step. The other part is establishing a time scale. What year are you looking at in the future? Is it 5 years down the road, 10 years, 25, or 50 years down the road? So now the team reflects upon those things, those factors, economic, political, you name it, that could have a bearing on that issue or concern. From there, you will then identify key certainties and uncertainties. Now, a key certainty is something that you are pretty sure is going to happen over the next few years, and it's important. It'll have a bearing on your question. A key uncertainty is something that you know is important, is going to be important, having a bearing on the issue, but you're not quite sure exactly which way it is going to go. From that, there's a technique which I won't bore you with now, where we use two of the key uncertainties, we select two, and you come up then with 4 scenarios. But then, very importantly, as you proceed in this process, you must constantly check the plausibility of the scenarios and make sure they are relevant to the question initially posed. And then finally, one then has, let's say, 4 scenarios, and then the team, the organization, will then have to deliberate and think about a strategy which will enable us to deal with the implications of those 4 scenarios. Now, I've only got a few minutes left. I prepared or brought along 2 scenario exercises that still in some ways work in progress. The one is, let me go straight into it, the nature and shape of this country's business cycle in the wake of COVID-19. Now, time doesn't permit me to go through the entire process of, what are the driving forces, etc. So I'm going to take a few shortcuts here, and first of all suggest that the one key driving uncertainty regarding how we are going to survive, or perhaps not survive economically, this crisis is something called the reproduction rate. That is the average number of people that an infected person can pass the virus on to. And right at the bottom, you see that this reproduction rate is determined by things such as detection, testing, isolating, treating every case, and tracing every contact. The abbreviation there, DTITT. So there it is. There you have, as you can see on the horizontal axis, the DTITT. And in terms of the way we go about thinking about scenarios, we now want to identify on this axis 2, if you like, polar outcomes. The one polar outcome is that here in this country, this DTITT will be exclusive and largely ineffective. The other polar outcome is it might turn out to be inclusive and more effective. The other key driving force is probably the extent and the efficiency and the effectiveness of any economic stimulus. And here we can look at a stimulus which is tepid and uninspired, as opposed to the polar outcome, aggressive, unorthodox even, audacious. A tepid stimulus would be roughly 1 to 5% of GDP. A more aggressive one would be 15 to 20%. Just as a side note here, in countries such as America and Europe, we are looking at stimulus packages being introduced by governments in the vicinity of 15% of GDP. Here, I'm afraid not much more than 5 or 6%, at least not so far. So we put the two together. So along the horizontal axis, the DTITT, along the vertical axis, the economic stimulus, and we end up with 4 scenarios, or hopefully 4 plausible scenarios. Now remember, the main aim of this is not to describe South Africa in a few months or a few years' time. It's all about the nature and extent of the business cycle. And I'm afraid any one of these scenarios, even the most favorable one, yields the word recession. So we're looking at a recession, no doubt about that. The question is how deep, how prolonged, and how severe will that recession be? So quickly, and I haven't got time to go through all the gory detail, the most favorable outcome is the top right-hand side, where the health response is fairly effective, the economic stimulus is fairly aggressive, but even then, we'll only manage to go back to where we were, let's say, pre-crisis, back in February. And you'll recall, that was not a very good place in any case. That's the most favorable outcome. Moving towards the left, there we have a less effective health response, a fairly effective economic response. I'd call that yay, but oops, because one might see an initial revival of economic activity, but it won't last very long. We'll go back into a downturn and then maybe another upturn, and we'll get a typical what they call W-shaped recovery. Bottom right-hand side, that is where the economic stimulus is fairly tepid. The health response a bit better, but even so, not a great outcome. This sucks. This will be a situation where the economy takes more than just a few months to return to where it was back in February. And bottom left-hand side, this really sucks. This is the worst of both worlds. And in fact, this combination could actually take the country into a prolonged and deep recession. We might even start using the word depression. It could take 6, 7 years before the economy returns to where it was back in February. I see the time has caught up with me, so I want to end off this with a bit of, if you like, pop psychology. People often ask me when I tell them I'm into futures thinking. You can imagine they often ask me, well, in that case, what does the future look like? And if this happens at some kind of function, social function, it can be an awfully boring conversation. I need to spend 20 minutes talking about the future, as I've just been doing now, and you don't always feel like doing that at a social function. So I came up with an answer years ago, excuse me, meant initially to put them off. But actually, on reflection, I think it's actually the best possible answer one could give. So what does the future look like? Here's the response. What do you want it to look like? I'm trying to say there that we are very fond of passing the buck, as it were. The future is somebody else's problem, whereas we need to realize that if we so wish, we can conspire, in the nicest sense of the word, to create a desired future. And I leave you with the last slide where I reflect upon my interpretation of how organizations and individuals and groups think about change and think about the future. And I invite you to decide which of these 3 categories you would like to attune yourselves to. So the first one I call the que sera approach. Loosely translated, what will be, will be. That's when organization says to itself, yes, I know all these things are changing and changing rapidly. There's not a thing I can do about it. If and when that change happens, then and only then will I consider the implications. That's a very short-sighted approach and one which one clearly would not recommend. Even more concerning is organizations that adopt what I call here the NIMBY approach, not in my backyard. This is where you're big and strong, you've been around for decades, even centuries, your bank balance is healthy, your balance sheet is good, and you say to yourself, yes, things are changing, but so what? I've been around for so long, I'm big and strong, it doesn't bother me. It'll affect all of you poor suckers, but not me. I don't need to bother about this change. Again, not a very smart approach. My last one, and maybe in the light of recent events, I should perhaps change this, but the Baden-Powell approach. He was the founder of the Scouting movement, although it transpires now, founder of other things as well. But nonetheless, the Baden-Powell approach, the Scouting movement's motto is BP, be prepared. So, be prepared for future. Think about it. Ask those questions. What's going on out there? So what? And now what? Develop, as we say, a memory of the future, which sounds grammatically very strange. What we mean by that is, if something were to happen in 10 years' time, if we've done our homework correctly, we should be able to say, oh yes, we mentioned that possibility back in the year 2020. And we said if that were to happen, this is how we would deal with it. A memory of the future. And to conclude, scenarios often a very useful tool and helping us to develop this memory of the future. The clock in front of me tells me it is 10:30. Excuse me. I'm going to have a quick look at a question. What then should organization use for future economic growth strategies if we cannot rely on economist numbers, as you mentioned? Well, if I had time, I'll give you a long talk now as an economist and not perhaps as a futurist.
Sorry, Prof. Sorry to interrupt. Could I make a suggestion that we deal with the questions at the end, or you can of course type the answer into the chat facility.
Sure. When you say the end, you mean the end of the entire session?
Yes. If you aren't going to be around, then obviously you can do it in writing on the chat facility.
All right. Right. We play that one by ear then. Fine. Fine.
Great. Thank you.
In that case, I think,
thank you. Yes, thank you, Prof. That was extremely insightful, and in spite of your warning at the beginning, I think your timekeeping was spot on. Personally, I found myself feeling quite guilty that I laughed at the totally sucks scenario, although that does seem to be the most descriptive way that I've seen it put before. Once again, to all of you at home, please use the chat facility in Zoom or on YouTube if you have questions for the professor, and he will deal with those while the rest of the talks are on. Another reminder, 2.5 CPD accredited by the IISA, and of course today we're also joined by Thokozile from the IISA, who really needs no introduction as she's well known to most of us in the insurance industry, and she carries the responsibility for building the professional and strategic objectives of the industry. So over to you, Thokozile.
Good day, ladies and gentlemen. Half of the year is gone just like that. A lot has happened. Today, I'm going to share on the key successes or highlights at the IISA, and I'll also share our strategic positioning or repositioning as we go forward. We've experienced a 7% increase in membership growth, which is great. However, we still have to work on the growth rate of the levels of associates and fellow, as well as ensuring that our membership base has got a representation of the South African demographics. We launched the Executive Development Program, and we've got 20 delegates undergoing that vigorous and practical training, equipping them to become agile leaders. Isn't that great? We also had the second cohort of the director training. It was a huge success. It's the second one. We had the first one last year. These are two projects that are contributing towards the pool of skilled people at this level. Furthermore, it's our way of contributing to the shortage of skills at this level within the industry. We launched an e-learning platform. In that platform, we have loaded the 2019 conference videos. All the online sessions that we are hosting are recorded and are placed on the platform. So take advantage of that, enhance your knowledge. While enhancing your knowledge, you'd also be earning your CPD hours. We also introduced the virtual training following the lockdown and not being able to have face-to-face training. In the last 3 months, we have reached over 1,200 insurance practitioners. Another way, we're just trying to bring insurance education or skills development innovatively. In a constantly changing environment, as an organization, we also have to ensure that we remain relevant to you as an industry and our members. We therefore got together with the board and we reviewed the positioning and strategic direction of the ISA. So, the purpose of the ISA has been reviewed to be the elevation of credibility of the insurance profession. Our service offering, it is to accredit insurance professionals and provide programs in skills development in the insurance industry. Our vision is to be the leading professional body in insurance, bringing prestige to the profession. Our mission is to elevate and transform the insurance profession by continuously delivering quality programs that contribute to the skills development in the industry. We have 4 strategic pillars which are aligned to the acronym IISA. The first I is innovative development. The second I is influential reputation. S is for sustainable organization. A is for active engagements. Each pillar is underpinned by a strategic objective. Under innovative development, we have innovatively deliver quality insurance development programs as an objective. Under influential reputation, we have an objective to elevate the insurance profession to be one that is aspired to. Under sustainable organization, we want to ensure that we have a sustainable and thriving organization. Lastly, under active engagements, we are focusing on enhancing stakeholder engagements and retention of our stakeholders. So that's us as we steer the ISA ship to a desired future and thriving to remain relevant to you, our members, and the industry as a whole. Watch this space as we start implementing the value proposition of the ISA and making sure that you experience it. Thank you.
Thanks, Thokozile. As you know, the backbone of the insurance industry really lies in the global insurance, in the global reinsurance market. And we're extremely fortunate today to have Mike van Sloten, the head of business intelligence for Aon London Reinsurance Solutions. He'll be talking us through the impact of the pandemic on the global RI market. Welcome, Mike.
Thank you, Simon. Yes, good morning, everybody. Can you hear me okay?
Yes, we can.
Great. Fine, I'm going to try and some slides up. So yes, good morning, everybody. I have the unenviable task of following Professor Roux, who I think did a great job with his talk. Just struggling to find my slides at the moment, Simon.
They're just on the left of your desk there, Mike, behind the telephone. I'm kidding, I have no idea where they are.
It's not giving me the option to share, sorry.
We can see the slides now, Mike.
You can see them?
Yeah.
Okay. Does that look okay? I'll work from here then.
Yeah, it's showing your desktop view rather than the audience view. That should do. There we go. Perfect.
Okay. Apologies for that, everybody.
Great.
Yes.
No
so we're going to narrow the focus a bit now and talk about what's been going on in the global reinsurance market in the last few months, focusing specifically on the impact of COVID-19, obviously. And I'm going to start by looking at some of the macro effects of COVID-19, which Professor Roux has just talked about so eloquently. We've obviously seen an unprecedented situation in the last few months in terms of the economic lockdowns around the world. That has caused a lot of turbulence in the global capital markets, which are very relevant to the global reinsurance industry. And between February the 19th and March the 23rd, global stock markets fell by about a third, which was much more dramatic than anything we saw in the financial crisis in 2008. So this was a very dramatic and unsettling time in the market. In reaction to that, governments and central banks really provided an unprecedented level of support. The US and the UK cut their interest rates to close to 0%. Central banks have injected a massive amount of liquidity into the financial system to make sure that everything is working as it should. And I think that's been very important. Is afloat to keep people in jobs. That situation is going to change going forward. That support is gradually being withdrawn. And the question is, as that support is withdrawn, what is that going to leave behind? Are we going to see big increases in unemployment? Are we going to see a surge in corporate insolvencies? I think that's one of the big unanswered questions really between now and the year end. But anyway, that support, that massive support that has been provided has been sufficient to allow the markets to rebound. And it's brought some stability to the global capital markets, which has been very important. And you look at the IMF forecast. So that's kind of the reality, if you like, of what the IMF and the World Bank see in that table on the bottom left. So they forecast global GDP to be down by around 5%, including 8% in the US, 10% in Europe. And these are completely unprecedented numbers. We've never seen anything like that. Certainly not in the financial crisis, where I think US GDP was down by about 4%, for example. But you compare that with what's happened in the stock markets. Clearly, as I say, that support has been enough to stimulate quite a strong recovery in the stock market. I would argue that maybe the market has actually got ahead of itself at this point. And there is the potential for a correction really in the second half of the year as the sort of the full extent of the economic damage becomes apparent. So that's the kind of the big picture, if you like, just touching on a couple of the big themes that we've seen in the global economy over the last 3 or 4 months. Let's just talk about the impact specifically on the reinsurance sector. And I think it has been a significant impact because both sides of the balance sheet are being affected. And what I mean by that is insurance and reinsurance companies are major investors in terms of equities and bonds, all sorts of asset classes. Clearly, a lot of those assets have been marked down, so they've lost value certainly in the first quarter of the year. I think there's been some recovery in the second quarter, but certainly there was quite a heavy impact in the first quarter to the end of March. We know there are going to be a lot of pandemic-related claims hitting the industry. I think the view has been, or initially the view was that the claims burden would be very manageable. I think as time has progressed and as lockdowns have become extended, the consensus now is that the claims burden is going to be quite substantial. The consensus for insured losses is in the order of $60 to $80 billion, something like that. So not an unprecedented event, if you like, for the global insurance industry, but that would certainly rank as one of the biggest insured losses ever. And of course, it's come from a very unexpected source. So it isn't kind of built into business plans, and all the usual risks are still out there. So obviously big earthquakes and volcanic eruptions can happen at any time. We're in the early stages of the Atlantic hurricane season. So again, I think one of the big things to watch between now and the year end is the extent of any additional major loss activity, given that catastrophe budgets have already been impacted by what's happened in the first and second quarters. There are also going to be some quite dramatic secondary effects due to what's happening with the economy. So premium flows are likely to be disrupted in various different areas. the effects of recession, lower levels of economic activity are going to be felt going forward as well. And you've probably seen the market loss estimate from Lloyd's, which exceeded $200 billion. That was an attempt to assess the full impact on the asset side and on the liability side. As I said, I think the consensus view that the pure sort of claims impact is more likely to be in the region of $60 to $80 billion. And why is this relevant for the reinsurance market? Well, I think what's happened here is that COVID has exacerbated a lot of trends or pressures that were already existing in the market. So back in January, when Aon produced its market outlook report, its renewals report, we talked about a modest but progressive tightening of reinsurance capacity as 2020 went on. And there were various reasons for that. One is that reinsurers have not met their earnings expectations over the last 5 years. And that is because of the big catastrophe losses that we've seen, particularly in the US. And it looks like reinsurers will fall short again in 2020. So the sector will not cover its cost of capital in 2020. We know that already. So that situation has been extended, if you like. At the end of last year, there was a lot of talk about reserving uncertainty. This particularly relates to casualty business, and particularly in the US. And I think reserving uncertainty has increased as a result of COVID-19. We don't really know how big the losses are going to be. We don't know the distribution of the losses between the insurance, reinsurance, and retrocession markets. And we don't really know the timing of the loss recognition. It looks to me like the losses will extend out over, many quarters, potentially several years. So it's going to take a while, I think, for the full impact of what's happened here to be reflected in the figures that the industry is reporting. On the capital side, so I would say that the reinsurance sector was still strongly capitalized going into 2020, but it clearly wasn't as strongly capitalized as it was 5 years previously. That's because of the catastrophe losses that we've seen. And it's also because a lot of reinsurance companies have grown significantly in the last 2 to 3 years. Demand has increased. So exposures have increased, and that has impacted capital adequacy. Then, of course, you get COVID-19, and you get particularly the asset side write-downs in Q1, and that has had the impact of reducing solvency to some degree. But you can see in that chart, we've got the big four Europeans there, and that's showing their regulatory solvency ratios, the movement between the end of 2019 and the end of March. On average, the reduction was about 20 points. Prior to COVID-19, all of these companies were trading beyond their target levels, so they were strongly capitalized. COVID-19 had the effect of bringing those ratios back within their target ranges. So this is not a dramatic impact for the biggest reinsurers. I think maybe for some of the smaller ones, it's more significant. We have seen some rating downgrades and rating outlook changes in the last few months, and that's something I'll talk about in a minute. A couple of other things that have been exacerbated. So the supply, the cost and availability of retrocession capacity, which is the protection that reinsurers buy to protect themselves, that has become more limited in recent years. A lot of that capacity is provided by what are called alternative capital providers, so pension funds. It tends to be provided on a collateralized basis. A lot of that collateral has been trapped by the big catastrophes that we saw in 2017 and 2018. And we think that additional collateral is going to be trapped by COVID-19 because of the uncertainty. So this is a situation where cedents feel they're unclear about whether they are ultimately going to be facing losses. If they've bought collateralized protection, they will tend to leave the collateral in place until they have a much clearer idea of what their ultimate loss position is likely to be. So that is going to have the effect of reducing the supply of retrocession capacity and increasing its cost. And that can impact the underwriting appetite of reinsurers. And then the final thing is interest rates. So we actually saw interest rates falling throughout 2019 in the US, largely because of the trade war with China. Clearly that has been accelerated in 2019. As I mentioned, interest rates in the US were cut to virtually zero back in, I think it was March or early April. So all of those things that were existing before have kind of been made worse. And then on top of that, I think you've got a whole load of uncertainty around COVID-19, and that is tending to make people cautious. I think reinsurers are being much more discerning when it comes to deploying their reinsurance capacity. So they have capital, they have capacity, but they're being much more careful about how they're deploying it into the market. Just a quick look at the first quarter results for the industry, and this feels like old news where we're about to start getting the second quarter results through, which I think will be interesting. But looking back at the first quarter, the main thing that stood out for me was that there was a very wide range of approach to recognizing losses for COVID-19. You have to bear in mind this was very early. So this is the period to the end of March the 31st. The stock market was close to its lowest point. So the asset side write-downs were quite significant at that point. It was still very early days in terms of trying to estimate or recognize COVID-19 losses. And you can see in that table, the bottom left, that's the losses versus the net premium in the first quarter. So it's the combined ratio impact, and it varied significantly across the reinsurers that we're seeing there. There are some companies that actually didn't recognize any COVID-19 losses in the first quarter. And there's one that actually made some attempt to estimate its ultimate loss. So that is a very difficult, very different situation from one end of the industry to the other. When it comes to reported capital, most of the companies that we're tracking did report overall losses for the first quarter because of the asset write-downs. And you'll see that had an impact in terms of reported capital levels. So that table on the right is showing an average reduction of around 7% in the first quarter. We think that some of that will come back in the second quarter. As I said, the capital markets have improved. The stock market has recovered to some degree. We think that will be offset by increased COVID-19 losses being reported at Q2 as the industry catches up with what's happened in the last few months. Difficult to know exactly where we'll end up, but we will know in about 2 months' time when we've got a full roundup of the industry's results. Let's just look at the impact on, so we talked about the impact on the sort of global stock markets, if you like. This is our attempt to look at the impact on reinsurance company share prices. I'm using what we call the ARA, that's Aon's reinsurance aggregate here, to track the stock market value of about 21 listed companies. You can see them named in that chart on the right-hand side. And we've indexed the chart to January the 1st, and you'll see that actually the value of those companies rose up until February the 19th, which is when global markets were at their all-time highs, actually, which is a strange thing to say. It wasn't that long ago. And then in that 5-week period between February the 19th and March the 23rd, the stock market value of those companies fell by nearly 50%. And as I said, that's a far more dramatic reduction than we saw in the financial crisis in 2008. I've never seen anything like that in my career. So it was a very unsettling time. You can see that that index has recovered quite a lot in the last few months, but it's still bouncing around. There's still a lot of volatility, and I think these companies are still, very reactive to news flow around COVID-19. So to the extent that we see stories like, Melbourne being locked down, I think there's a big area of Spain that's been locked down again. This has a direct impact on economic activity. And that clearly is not helpful as far as global stock markets or the insurance and reinsurance sectors are concerned. Just looking quickly at the individual company share price performance on the right, you'll see, there's always going to be a spread of performance, if you like, but there's a couple of companies there that are still down 40 to 50% as we stand today. This is the year-to-date performance that we're showing you. The biggest companies in the industry, Swiss Re is still down by about 33% year-to-date. Munich Re is down by more like sort of 15%, I guess. So for most companies in the industry, this has still been a painful adjustment. And as I say, I think the two things that are overhanging share prices are continued uncertainty around the ultimate losses. And again, I hope we'll get more clarity on that in the second quarter. And the second thing people are concerned about is the scope for a wave of corporate insolvencies and the impact that might have on the insurance and reinsurance sectors. Just to look quickly at what the rating agencies have been saying about this. So this is the commentary from the four main rating agencies on the reinsurance sector over the last few months. Two of them now have a negative outlook on reinsurance. I think two things to highlight. One is in the top left, AM Best reported on their stress testing in mid-May and said that they saw the industry as broadly resilient to COVID-19, but they did flag that companies based in higher risk domiciles definitely appeared to be more vulnerable. And one of the things we've seen in the last week or so is the downgrade of GIC, General Insurance Corporation of India, and that is related to quite heavy exposure to the Indian stock market. So that's an example really of what AM Best was talking about, I think. And then S&P top right, again in mid-May, they stated that there was the potential for some further negative rating actions, more based on capital adequacy. So to the extent that they see outlier companies after Q2 reporting, if they see companies that are facing capital impacts and they don't think those companies are going to be able to recapitalize in a relatively short period of time, it is possible that we'll see further rating downgrades in the remainder of 2020. So that's definitely something to be aware of. This table is trying to highlight or capture what's changed in 2020. So we've got a whole list of companies, most of the major reinsurance sort of trading partners of Aon, if you like, all of the AM Best and S&P ratings and outlooks. And we've color coded this. So anything that's pink is negative. Anything that's green is positive in 2020. And I think we've now got 7 downgrades. So 7 single notch downgrades and a few more outlook changes. So this represents a change relative to what we've seen in prior years. Ratings have generally been very stable, very resilient, despite the big cat losses that we saw in 17 and 18. But I think, we've seen quite a few rating actions as a result, not really so much of COVID-19. A lot of what we're seeing here is being driven by underperformance over the last 5 years. And as I say, there is the potential for maybe, 1 or 2 more rating actions based on capital adequacy in the second half of the year. So, half a dozen rating changes, a few more outlook changes, not that dramatic at this point, but this situation needs to be watched going forward. I'm getting asked all the time, what's the outlook for pricing at January 1? Certainly, obviously, that's the major renewal period in Europe, at least. And these are some of the things I'm thinking about. These are some of the questions that kind of need to be answered between now and then before we can have a better idea of what the market's going to be looking like. I've talked about some of the economic impacts of what's happened. So we know premium flows are going to be disrupted in certain areas. We know there's uncertainty around the loss reporting. We think there will be a bit more consistency in Q2. That will help to better establish where the industry is actually standing as a result of what we've seen. I've talked about the insolvencies and the potential for new lockdowns and the impact that might have on the capital markets. The final thing, that the variable that I haven't really touched on, is the potential for new capital to come into the industry. That can obviously help to mitigate some of the pressures that we're seeing elsewhere. And I'm just going to finish off by just sharing with you some of the work we've done to capture some of the capital raising activity in the last few months. And there has been quite a lot of activity. So on this slide, you're seeing around $8 billion of equity that's been raised. I've been having a lot of conversations around the extent to which this is defensive, i.e. are these companies that are needing to shore up their solvency positions and are looking to, protect their positions against the uncertainty of the claims that may be coming down the pipe? Or are some of these more offensive and designed to allow companies to take advantage of a better market going forward? And I think the reality is that it's a blend. So I think there are some companies on here where it was more defensive, frankly. And I think there are others where, potentially they see the best market ahead for perhaps the last decade, and they're very keen to be positioned to take advantage of that. Final slide is a bit more speculative. This is a summary of some of the news stories that we've seen around new company startups. So there's no doubt that private equity funds have started to show more interest on the underwriting side because capacity is more constrained at this point, because pricing is expected to rise. We've seen pricing rise at the mid-year renewals. And so we have seen greater private equity interest on the underwriting side. There are a number of executives that happen to be available at the moment, if you like. They're in the market, and there are various linkages being made between private equity and those executives. So there's probably 7 or 8 different initiatives being talked about here. Some are new startups, so these may be new rated companies. Others are existing players that are looking to expand, so they're looking to raise capital to grow their business. And I think, still a lot of uncertainty around whether these companies actually come to fruition and actually come to the market. But you could potentially see maybe another $5 billion of capital coming from these initiatives. And we have to wait and see what happens between now and the year end. I think there's a lot of investors kind of sitting on the sidelines. They've seen what's happened with the mid-year renewals. They will probably wait to see what the second quarter results look like, and then try to read the tea leaves in terms of what the opportunity might be at the end of the year. But capital can move very fast. We're living in a zero interest rate world. So to the extent to which investors see an opportunity in the reinsurance space, there may be additional capital that comes into the sector between now and the year end. So I think that I'm going to leave it there, Simon, and hand it back to you.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you, Mike. I think that's really valuable intel for all of us in the industry. And I must say, one of the worst things about lockdown here in South Africa is that after you've attended a COVID reinsurance talk, you can't actually have a stiff drink. But what we can do, of course, is lift our mood slightly. And now, ladies and gentlemen, and non-binaries, it gives me great pleasure to transport you to our virtual kitchen, to introduce you to a man who manages to titillate the taste buds and brings you the delight of dining digitally. I give you the Josie Secret Chef.
Hey everybody, I hope you can all hear me. Just gonna get a thumbs up if you can all hear me.
We can hear you.
Fantastic. Just a quick one. My name is Emilio and I am a partner at the Cookery by the Secret Josie Chef. Just a little bit about what we do. We run social interactive cooking classes, or well, I guess you could say we used to, until the 15th of March, but we are pushing through and in fact celebrating that tonight we're going to be hosting our first pasta making class. Kind of just to give you an idea of what we do, I thought the easiest way to do this would be to actually teach you guys something while I have you all focused on me. So I'm going to be making up a spaghetti carbonara, all right? It is dead simple, really, really achievable. And I'm going to make sure that everybody part of this call is going to get a little video in about a week's time, because we started our YouTube channel where we're going to be doing promotional videos on what we do. So carbonara comes from a very beautiful history, in that carbonara reflects the people or the warriors in Italy that used to travel around, and they couldn't carry refrigeration with them, obviously. So they used to carry everything they could make, which was eggs and flour for the pasta, pancetta or guanciale, which is the cheeks of the pig that had been cured, salt, black pepper, and water. So wherever they went, they could make up a carbonara. While I'm just chatting, I'm going to just take the spaghetti over here and get it into boiling water. Right. Now, there are a few things in the world that give me crippling anxiety in 2020. One of them is coronavirus. And the second thing is people who don't put salt in their pasta water. So I'm going to be doing about 2 tablespoons of salt. You need to be generous with your salt when you're making pasta. If you aren't generous, your pasta will taste flat, and it's really difficult to get that salt into it. Now, I've got a pan on over here, and I've got some pancetta that I bought earlier. So pancetta, you can see, is rollado. It's been rolled up and cured. And I'm just going to be cutting that up nicely. If you do not eat pork or meat, what I would suggest is do something with zucchini or courgette, all right? They are a really, really great substitute. The reason I've put this pasta in already, by the way, is that I want to show you that you really can get this done in the time that your pasta takes to cook. So I'm going to crank that heat up a little bit, give it a little stir, and I'm going to be adding just a little bit of butter because I'm gluttonous, and that's going to just help out with frying that pancetta. Right, and you get that heat nice and high and give your pasta. Now with your pasta, you'd never want to overstir your pasta. Give it 1 or 2 good stirs. All right, and I've got your 200 grams of pasta for about 2 liters of water. You want to use a liter per 100 grams when you make pasta, otherwise your pasta gets really, really stodgy. You want to have the starch boil off. Right, to carry on with the rest of our ingredients, let me just give that a little stir. I've got here some grana padano parmesan. You can use pecorino as well, and some eggs. For 200 grams, I'm going to be using 3 eggs, which is going to be 1 whole egg and 2 egg yolks. So let's start by just getting our eggs separated over here. Crack, break, split. All right, we're going to get 1 egg here. Now, people always tell me that surely there must be cream in a carbonara. I will ask you to leave my house if you ask for cream in a carbonara. All right, 2 egg yolks and 1 whole egg. The dairy that comes into a carbonara is not from cream or milk or anything like that, but it's actually from the parmesan. So into our egg yolks, we're going to be adding about ½ a cup of grated parmesan. I'm going to get this done. This parmesan is going to help bind our whole sauce together. So let's just get that nicely. Right, with the eggs and the parmesan, we're going to be adding some black pepper. Now you can just use a good old-fashioned pepper seller and crack pepper in. I like to kind of take it to another level and give us 2 layers of black pepper. So there's parmesan that's going to go into there. All right, and then black pepper. I'm going to do about 8 cracks or 9 cracks of black pepper into here. And then I'm going to empty some black pepper out into a mortar and pestle, just about ½ a teaspoon's worth, and powder it. So you get this beautiful pepperiness happening throughout the whole dish. All right, pancetta's looking fantastic. You want to get a little bit of a crisp happening on it. And if you have the luxury of time, which I clearly don't, you want to actually do this on a really low heat, add no butter, and let the fat of the pancetta actually fry it up. All right, I have got my pepper nicely grounded, and I'm just going to add a nice pinch to there and a pinch to our pancetta. Give that a little stir up, and also just give my pasta 1 more little stir. I'm using quite a fine spaghetti today, so it should be ready in 6 minutes from me putting it in. And my pancetta is coming to beautifully. Now, I'm just going to give this a little stir. And you can see it actually makes a beautiful paste, a cheesy, eggy paste. Now, people get very confused when I say this, that what carbonara really is, or the sauce for a carbonara, is a savory custard. The mechanism remains the same. You're heating up eggs in hot liquid in order to cook them without scrambling them. Right, I've got my little mixture made up over there. My pancetta is getting crispy. Pasta water is your best friend. And this isn't just for carbonara. This is for any pasta you ever make. So I'm going to take a ladle of pasta water and just go straight into the pan. And one more ladle straight into the pan. And I'm going to switch that to a lower heat. Right, this pasta water in here is going to form the base of our custard. And my spaghetti is actually ready as well. So I'm just going to move this across here. And I'm going to hoik my spaghetti straight across into my pan. All right. I am a bit of a salt fiend, so I'm still going to add a little bit more salt to the spaghetti. All right, and that's what we are after. This I'm going to move over there. Switch that off. And what you want to start doing now, and just clear this so you can see properly, is start spinning your pasta in your pot. All right, there should be enough water, and you want to just start spinning that to spiral it around your spoon. And as you spin, you're going to start adding a little bit or all of your paste. My handle is doing a little dance for me, so I'm going to try and stop it. There we go. And you're going to add that in and stir. All right, give that a little flick and stir. If you see your egg start splitting, all you need to do is just add a bit more pasta water to it. All right. And you can see how this is getting beautifully creamy. I'm going to add a splash more pasta water. So I want a little bit more sauce. And the moment you add that pasta water and stir it, you get a stunning, creamy custard. All right, just keep that moving and stir that through. Now, what we do at the cookery, of course, is more than just teach people to cook, but we want to make people fall in love with cooking. And I know during lockdown in SA, people have been cooking a lot. I think there was definitely a phase for banana bread at a stage. Excuse me, let me grab a little plate. We try and get people to fall in love with everything and fall in love with food, connect people over food. I think lockdown has almost disconnected some people to food because it just became fuel eventually. And we're here to make you fall in love with the process and also to make it easy and fun for everyone. What we've decided to do at the cookery is we've kind of obviously had to cut our numbers quite dramatically, but we're hosting now groups of 15 for public classes, as well as birthdays and mini team buildings for small offices and incentives. So while we wrap this up, I'm just going to grab this pasta, spin it, spin it. I know I am hungry now. I'm going to lift that, move it to our plate, cause a total mess. All right. A little bit more over there. Give that a nice little spin. Clean that up. Of course, you want to finish up with a little bit of Parmesan because life wouldn't be complete without it. And when people just say stop, I actually just keep quiet for about 20 minutes until the Parmesan's finished. A little pinch of black pepper over the top, and you have got here your absolutely perfect spaghetti carbonara. Guys, I really hope to hear from some of you. I'm going to be sending details through. If you do want to contact us and run anything with us, we'd absolutely love to hear from you. Hope you guys enjoyed this little cooking session, and I hope to teach you guys in person one day soon. Thank you so much for that.
Thanks, Emilio. My mouth is absolutely watering, and it's a pity we don't have olfactory capabilities online yet. But wonderful talk, brilliant demonstration, and hopefully we get to sample that in person at some point. Thank you. Next up, we're joined by John Melville. Thanks, Emilio. Next up, we're joined by John Melville, who is the Executive Head of Risk Services at Santam. He'll be talking us through the increasingly important role of insurance and proper risk management in a world that I think you have to admit is changing at breakneck speed. John, the virtual stage is yours.
Great, thank you, Simon, and welcome to everybody. Good morning. It's good to be with you. Can you all see my video?
We can see your PowerPoint presentation screen, John, although it is in the presenter view, so you'll need to share it.
Is that better?
Still presenter view. So we can see your sort of notes page.
John, just select display settings at the top of your screen.
Right.
And just say mirror. Duplicate slideshow.
Duplicate slideshow. Right, is that better?
Yes, perfect.
That is perfect.
Great, great. Thanks, Simon. And great to be with you, as I said. I'm going to be talking about insurance and risk management in a changing world, and what a time in which to do that. We're going to start off with looking at the risk environment that we're operating in. Look at then some key trends that we believe will shape the future of the insurance industry that we have to take into account. Tackle this thing called COVID-19, which has just descended upon us this year, and how does insurance relate to that? What role does the insurance sector play in the economy more broadly? And how should we as an insurance industry respond to systemic risks? The risk environment, as insurance practitioners, we are absolutely focused on risk. So it's central to what we do. So I thought, let's first have a look at the top 10 risks in terms of likelihood and impact that were listed in the World Economic Forum's Global Risk Report for 2020. Let's have a look at them. You'll note that this was published in January of this year. And if you have a look, what do you notice about it? I think I've given it away at the top of the slide. Not even a mention of pandemic risk in the likelihood column. And infectious diseases comes in at number 10 in terms of impact. How the world has been turned upside down in a matter of a few months since our sage global leaders met at Davos just in January. That said, the risks that are listed here are relevant and important to us. But what else do we notice about them? Many of them are systemic in that they're interconnected and affect the whole world. Examples are climate change and environmental risks, cyber risks, and asset bubbles. So this is complexity at its best. Now, in terms of the risk environment, we've all seen risk is getting complex. It's constantly evolving. COVID-19 is one of the global risks that's threatened us. And we ask ourselves the question, what is the role of insurance in all of this? Is it relevant? Can it make a difference? With risks so volatile and complex, where should we as insurers begin? How should we manage the risks? Given that many of them are systemic, what actions can we take today to mitigate the risks of tomorrow? What role should we play as insurance companies in risk mitigation? And is there a role perhaps for public-private partnerships to fund and execute broad-scale changes that are needed to address some of the world's most critical risks? In trying to answer all these questions, let's have a look at some of the strategic trends that we believe are shaping the insurance industry, because they really are the space in which we're going to be operating over the next number of years. And if you look at these are key drivers that we've identified as that are going to shape the insurance industry over the next 5 to 10 years. And what are some of the themes that you pick up there? You can see clearly technological themes, Industry 4.0, digital transformation, changing customer behavior, workforce for the future, cyber risk. Then we've got environmental themes, climate change, ESG embeddedness, referring to the fact that increasingly pressure is being brought to bear on us to disclose how we're responding to ESG risks. We've got the social and political themes, regulatory risk, risk protection gaps, trust deficits in terms of the insurance industry, the social license to operate, economic themes. Professor Roos talked about some of those today, instability, high debt levels, changing economic models for consumption. So big drivers all in place probably really for a while now. And then 2020 comes along with a crisis that no one was expecting. And many of these, in fact, were accelerated. So let's focus on COVID-19. And there, just the stark picture that you see of a world from the beginning of April that was completely emptied. And I think just the absolute scale of that was unimaginable for most of us. In fact, and I think that certainly none of us are accepted there. So what is this COVID-19 and how does it relate to insurance, and what can we do about it? How do we think about it in terms of risk management? Great global crises typically involve widespread losses across the spectrum. And I think we know the losses have been massive. And firstly, of course, the human losses, mortality, health impairment, the great tragedies. And then, of course, the economic losses, which are just staggering. If you think of the whole world literally stopping, the losses of livelihood, jobs, businesses, wealth. And when we think about this as risk practitioners, we need to think about how losses like this can be mitigated. How do we distribute them across societies? How do they get distributed over time? Bill Gates warned more than 5 years ago that this was a material, important risk, and the world needs to mitigate it. It needs to think about it. It needs to build systems to manage this risk. In terms of just how the risks are distributed, if you do nothing, obviously it destroys sectors that are most vulnerable. It destroys people, individual livelihoods, economically. But we found that from an insurance perspective, it makes sense to pool risk. And how do we relate to this notion of pooling risk in the context of something that affects the whole world simultaneously? Now, the distribution of losses for something like this across society is typically determined by government. Government can provide relief to certain sectors by taxing others. It can borrow money and tax society in the future to pay for current losses. Then there's the existence of insurance pools, which essentially amounts to advanced preparation for losses using global and local pools of capital. But the complexity of this is that COVID-19, in fact, hit everybody at once. I can't think of an example in my lifetime of something that has literally hit every country in more or less a similar manner at the same time. What has the insurance industry done so far? So before we get into the nitty-gritty of what we can do for things like this going forward, the immediate response of insurers has been to look at how customer needs potentially change and do change in situations like lockdowns and restricted economic activity. And of course, we've got a number of responses there, particularly on the motor side, where people weren't driving as much, far fewer claims, far fewer accidents. And so many insurers have responded in that respect. There have been massive contributions to provide relief, both through the Solidarity Fund centrally, which is helping deal with the health aspects of the pandemic, but then also to provide relief support to clients. Overall, I don't have the number, but it's at least R1 billion that the industry has plowed back in terms of premium relief for people who are unable to pay their premiums, and also discounts to reflect the lower risk over the period of lockdown. But the question remains, can pandemics be insured? And there, I think the core value add that insurance and reinsurance offers is the ability to benefit from diversification, both at a country level and across the globe. And this relies on there being common uncertainties, perils, and risks that we're exposed to that don't all occur at once. So we can draw from the rest of the world's pot of capital to help pay for the typhoon that wipes out part of China in a given year. But the problem with COVID-19 is it's a global risk that affects everyone across the globe at the same time. And that presents a major problem for us because they're undiversifiable in a given period. It seems almost impossible to insure against losses that arise from something that impacts everyone at the same time. So what can be done? I mean, are our principles irrelevant, whether from a public sector or a private sector perspective? I suppose the one thing that one can leverage is that global pandemics don't happen every year. So perhaps there's an analogy here with the ancient story of the Pharaoh of Egypt being advised to fill up its granaries during the 7 years of plenty to provide for its people during the 7 lean years. And perhaps solutions can be devised through the collaboration of governments globally and global insurance and the global insurance and reinsurance industries to build provision ahead of time, because clearly without that we end up with a massive debt like we have now that will have to be paid off over many years to come. Right. So let's just reflect on the role of insurance in general. We might be feeling a little bit inadequate, as I suggested, in the face of something like COVID-19. But getting back to the essence, this is a quote you'll see on the screen that Joseph Plumeri, the then chairman and CEO of Willis Group, quoted at the insurance conference. It was probably about 5 years ago, but it was quite an extraordinary statement. Insurance is the DNA of the economy. Without insurance, nothing is built, nobody works, nothing floats, nothing runs on tracks, nothing ships. It rebuilds lives, cities, and companies. The World Trade Center would not have been rebuilt without the insurance industry, which pumped 4.4 billion rand into it. So there's no question that insurance is fundamental to economic activity. And even if risk transfer is much more challenging in the world that we're in at the moment to normal insurance risks, I believe there's no other industry than ours that has a deeper understanding of risk itself, how to manage it, and then how to adapt to it. And if we reflect on who we are, I think insurance works as the social protection mechanism. It allows individuals and businesses to recover from sudden misfortune by relieving or at least alleviating financial burden. It promotes financial stability and economic growth. There's a very clear empirical link between insurance development and economic growth. In fact, in many areas, insurance is a fundamental requirement for economic activity to take place, which is as Joe Plumeri, in fact, quoted. It contributes to societal safety and better risk management. I think this aspect is really important as well. Insurance industry is a source of risk management information that benefits society. By its nature, the sector needs to gather a lot of research on what constitutes and contributes to risk in many areas across a spectrum of disciplines. And the results of such research and sends pricing signals that fuel public debates on safety, leads to more risk-resilient behavior in the economy and society in general. So one of the things that we drive, and you can see this in many respects, is a safer world, a world that risk can be contained, mitigated, and ultimately transferred where it's unmitigated, not possible to mitigate. Then insurance and the systemic risk debate. There, I believe insurance expertise is a vital requirement in this space. We've contributed significantly to the debate around climate risk and impact of climate change. A lot of insurance industry research has helped to raise risk awareness, reduce societal risks, and promote the reduction of greenhouse gases. Also, the need to build resilience. I think that's really one of the most critical dimensions of managing systemic risk going forward. And as an insurance risk, we need to be at the center of the drive to build resilience. And in terms of pandemics, as I said earlier, that's really overdue. So what can we do as an insurance industry to deal with these risks? The first area in terms of pandemics must be collaboration. It's absolutely crucial. We can't do this on our own. We need to work with governments, government agencies, and build a model that enables us to prepare for a future that potentially could see more waves of pandemic, perhaps not at the scale, but perhaps on a smaller scale, and be prepared for that. There is a role for some risk pooling, and the critical thing here is a partnership between government and the insurance industry to enable that. I think of examples like SASRIA type entities where monies can be set aside for future events. We have a wonderful administrative arrangement in South Africa where we collect premiums on most policies that we write and put it into a central pool called SASRIA to deal with political type risks that we can't ordinarily insure within insurance policies. So the process works really slickly. It's been going since the mid-1970s, and it's effective. My sense is that if we want to build up funds over time in order to deal with pandemic risks, other systemic risks going forward, we need to leverage that infrastructure to, in fact, set money aside so that our policyholders can enjoy some protection for something like this, which is just ordinarily uninsurable. We see in other parts of the world that similar discussions are happening. We've got this Pandemic Risk Insurance Act being discussed in the USA. Catastrophe bonds is another area that we can work on potentially to try and help. In the space of climate change, another huge systemic risk that I think is brought into the spotlight just by the impact that the COVID-19 pandemic has had, and that we need to now start preparing. We need to start building resilience. We've got some wonderful examples already of bodies of pools, insurance pools that have been built between governments and reinsurers in the private sector to deal with vulnerable countries in the wake of climate risk. Pools like the African Risk Capacity, which has been set up in Africa. In Southeast Asia, you've got CDRIF, Southeast Asian Disaster Insurance Risk Facility, the Caribbean facility. We need to be working together with governments and cross-nationally to be building pools like this where we can all put money together, and to the extent that we are affected differently between different countries, we can draw on that pool, because certainly it isn't a solution to just wait for it to happen and then to try and borrow from the future to deal with the issues. So I think to do all of these things, we need to be building skill sets that we have in the insurance industry that perhaps we have in too limited a degree at this stage. And critical request, and this is really something that the Insurance Institute will surely take note of as well, and that is that we need to develop deeper understandings of systemic risks and pandemics, and what we can do and how we can contribute our knowledge and skill sets to addressing all aspects of the risk management around that going forward. We need to be looking at new insurance products and management solutions. I think it's not just the sort of extreme situation that we find ourselves in here. There are many sort of less frequent type events that potentially can fall into more traditional insurance pools. We need to then build the mix between public and private, and look to all of those different ways in which we can plan and prepare and benefit from diversification across the globe. Underwriting capabilities, very, very important for us to be developing those capabilities to understand systemic risks and to underwrite them smartly. As I indicated right at the beginning, in terms of the risk environment, systemic risk is not going to go away. It is really the risk that we face going future, and the more effort we put into grasping this, the better for us. Cyber risk is huge. I think what the lockdowns have actually precipitated around the world is a profusion of online engagement. We've all done it in our personal lives. We've seen how right around the world the tech stocks have just gone absolutely crazy, because everybody has been forced to adopt. And an adoption that perhaps from last year's perspective might have been considered as something that would happen over 5 years has happened in the space of 3 months. So the role that online plays in our world is going to increase. It's moved to a different level, and of course what that does is it brings about cyber risk exposures, and we as an industry are going to be increasingly less relevant if we can't in fact deal with these risks. According to Standard & Poor's Global Market Intelligence, cyber criminals are now pocketing an estimated $1.5 trillion annually 5 times the approximate cost of natural disasters, and 500 billion rand more than US industry net premiums. Business leaders also see cyber attacks as their biggest single threat. By 2025, the number of interconnected devices in the world is projected to be 75 billion, opening up an endless opportunity for criminals to attack. There is a fair amount of cyber underwriting expertise that's been built up around the world, and this has enabled risk management and insurance of some cyber risks. It's important that we, as South African insurers, act now to remain relevant in this dematerializing world. As I said earlier, we've been more dependent on online interaction than ever before, and few would disagree that we are already there. And so as we accelerate towards this online world, we see big changes ahead. And that will also affect our more traditional areas of insurance, like, for instance, motor. So we need to also respond to changing consumer needs in this space. I mean, we know consumers are driving less. There's a reduction in motor insurance claims. We need to reflect that in our products. Our products need to become more flexible and enable people to, in fact, be insured for their utilization. And I'm heartened that a number of companies have already responded, but increasingly we're going to see this as critical in terms of response to by product flexibility and adaptation in a world where change is happening at such a rate. We see on-demand transportation. More and more people will migrate to this, and of course we need the right products for that kind of world as well. And so lots to do in that space. So in conclusion, I think we've seen that COVID-19 has brought unprecedented challenges to the insurance industry. I don't think we could ever have predicted that anything like this would have affected us like this. It is indeed a 1 in 100 year event and experience for us. I think pandemics and other systemic risks, I think it's really been kind of brought home to us, will always be with us. I think some people were hoping that they would go away, things like climate risk, especially because it's fairly slow in onset. But I think what this has really brought home is that it is a reality, and designing cover for such risks, it's more complex. It needs more players, perhaps more engagement between the public and the private sector. But we need to do that. We need to build the skills and capability and bring them to other stakeholders in society, work with them to be able to provide some protection going forward. As I said, it's going to require collaboration. I think that's really absolutely crucial between governments, brokers, clients, and insurers to create solutions that enable protection against these risks and in order to build a resilient world. And I believe that the insurance industry has the ability to lead and coordinate the efforts. I mean, if we reflect on our own training and our own experience, insurance isn't just about the insurance contract. It's actually about the whole risk management spectrum. It's about how you treat risks. It's how you manage them. It's how you mitigate them. It's which ones you avoid, how you do that. And then ultimately, the benefit of diversification enables you to transfer some of the risks. We also see that businesses, consumers, and employees are rapidly adopting new technologies to support different ways of living and working. Increasing cyber risk, especially cybersecurity, data protection, have become much more important for business. And the insurance industry must remain relevant, as I've said. And just in closing then, we must join forces with our governments, our reinsurers, our suppliers and customers to build a more resilient world in every sense of that world. So thanks very much for your time, and over to you, Simon.
Thank you, John. I know there are a lot of moving parts to this right now, particularly around the pandemic. So we really do appreciate you sharing your insights with us. Before we move on, I just want to remind everyone that we'll be hosting InsureTalk4 on the 13th of August, also sponsored by Santam. So if you like what you see today, please join us for that event to spread the word. There is an early bird discount if you book now. I'll tell you a little bit more about that after the talks. But now it gives me great pleasure to welcome Nazrin Sali, who heads up ERM at Santam. She'll be sharing some insights on enterprise risk management in the current climate that we find ourselves in. Over to you, Naz.
Hi, everybody. Thanks, Simon. It's great that I'm following on from John, because John spoke about the role of insurance specifically and risk management overall. I am excited to talk to you guys about enterprise risk management specifically today in this new normal. But before we start, I'm just going to check that you can see my screen and it's working like it's supposed to work. Llewellyn, I am projecting my slideshow, and tell me if I need to do the swap.
Yes, that's perfect. No need to do that.
No need to swap. Okay, awesome. Great. Okay, thank you, guys. The role of ERM in this new normal. So what we'll cover today is I'll set the scene a little bit, and I'll talk specifically about what ERM is, enterprise risk management, and how we fit into the structure of an organization. We'll then talk a little bit about this new reality and the trends, and it builds on a lot from what John has spoken about and the earlier speakers as well. And then I'll move on to how this impacts the way we manage risks in this new reality and the key considerations coming out of that. Those considerations will be key in kind of setting the scene for ERM's new role in this new reality. So let's kick off. The last 4 months have been challenging in so many ways. Having to adapt to changes in how we work, live, and think has been hard for everybody. The global pandemic of the scale was not top of mind for any of us, and then it happened. And we have had to adapt. We've had to adapt fast. There will be no return to normal. The coronavirus is permanently reshaping the way we live and work, as we're all currently experiencing. Some of the behaviors developed in this crisis, and including specifically wide-scale digital adoption, will outlast the pandemic well after restrictions on activity are lifted. To stay competitive, organizations have had to shuffle the way we have been thinking in terms of responding to these behavioral changes and meeting emerging customer demands. How do we stay savvy in a crisis? Savvy organizations will focus on leveraging analytics to extract insights from customer data and continue internal and external integration efforts to develop a more holistic view. We have to detect those changes early and redefine customer value propositions in line with evolving preferences and customer needs. That's where we find ourselves. That's the emerging reality. So what is ERM? The slide that you're looking at now is a line of defense model for an organization. You'll notice that ERM sits within the second line assurance space. ERM is a second line of defense function. We're mandated by the board to protect stakeholder value by proactively identifying, analyzing, assessing, monitoring, and reporting of risks throughout the organization, hence enterprise risk management. We're also responsible for ensuring business continuity in the event of a disaster or crisis. So ERM teams, and specifically BCM teams, you can appreciate, I have never been busier in my entire career. And at some time I thought that I've been busy, but I've never been as busier as I've been during this crisis. Being a second line function and situated where we are, it gives us, it's a special position. In order for us to effectively add value, our approach is key. We're not internal audit, who need to be independent as a third line of defense. The level of independence for us does not have to be so strict. We have to liaise with business. And so partnership and collaboration is key, and building effective relationships so we can actually support business in ensuring a clean control environment. We see our value in supporting operating management, so that's your line 1 on the picture, to identify control weaknesses and close gaps before actually being exposed. If we get this right, we're obviously doing our jobs well. And just a little bit more on defining ERM, So you have it in context when we go into the role that I see us playing into the future. ERM includes methods and processes used by organizations to manage risks and seize opportunities related to the achievement of objectives. We provide frameworks and policies for risk management, which basically guide the business and ensure proper governance. By identifying and proactively addressing risks and opportunities, business enterprises protect and create value for their stakeholders. So, like I said earlier, this is a key deliverable of ERM. And most ERM functions are also responsible for the operational continuity of the business. So that's the BCM element. ERM is required to facilitate an effective continuity program that assures the organization's board that adequate resumption processes are in place in the event of a disaster. And I needed to clarify what we do. And now we can talk a little bit about this new reality that we find ourselves in. So, like the earlier speakers have also alluded to, if there were any lingering doubts about the necessity of digital transformation to business longevity, this COVID-19 crisis has silenced them. In a contactless world, the vast majority of interactions with customers and employees must take place virtually. With rare exception, operating digitally is the only way to stay in business through mandated shutdowns and restricted activity. It's literally been go digital or go dark. This mandate, though, is not new. It's simply been brought into sharp focus. Under COVID-19, the world has by necessity gone into isolation, with social distancing being the most effective way, really, to slow the spread of the virus. This is what we've needed to do. And as a result, anything that relies on human-to-human contact, which is to say most aspects of our lives, right, must be amended to account for the dangers of the virus. Digitization has stepped in to bridge the gaps left by mandated shutdowns. Without digital tools and technologies, we would actually have had no way to work, shop, go to school, and so much more. It's incredible how the ease and convenience of digitization questions for many of us the actual need to return to the office even after the coronavirus is brought under control. But this is also true for several other trends that will be here to stay. Remote work arrangements have literally, that's the state of our lives right now. Digitization of so many things, like I've just alluded to. One of my favorites is platformification. So we've seen it in banking in recent years, but today, things like education, fitness, conferences, shopping, communication, so much more has been delivered to us by digital platforms. I mean, in putting these slides together, I read online that the global fashion industry's reliance on digital channels has accelerated faster than anyone could have anticipated, and it's really not surprising. I don't believe, though, that going forward, that platformification should be the sole option that we use. I think that what we should learn from COVID-19 specifically is that having just one approach is not sustainable, and perhaps a more hybrid approach to going about our lives is what we should be thinking about, because as human beings, we do need social contact, but just, balanced out with digital platforms, I think will be a much more sustainable way of looking at things. But moving on, so contactless delivery options, we see that these days as well. It's become the way we live. Outsourced IT, customers focusing on spending less and saving more. Another big one, and we see it with the regulations currently, is the increased focus on safety, cleanliness, and health. It's taken over our lives. We've all become control freaks about cleanliness and protecting ourselves from the virus, and it extends to the workplace, and so it impacts operations as well. And another interesting one for me is that because we've literally been thrown into this pandemic and thrown out of our comfort zones, we will be looking at culture, at leadership, and at personal growth with a different lens going forward, and I think that will be interesting for all of us. So how do we manage business risks in these uncertain times? The COVID-19 pandemic has disrupted many organizations, leaving all of us stranded with uncertain return dates and affecting global organizations with operations across the world where the virus has spread perhaps. This has unevenly affected customer demand and resulted in employee immobilization and significant supply chain disruptions. Risk management teams and businesses as a whole should expect to continue to operate in an environment of uncertainty. Among the assurance functions, as I showed previously in the initial slide, I see ERM as best equipped to help the business navigate through this period of disruption. I see what we're doing at Santam as testimony to this. As ERM teams, we need to take account of challenges and certain considerations as well. We spoke about the continuity challenges, obviously, as employees are basically stranded in various locations worldwide. The health and safety regs that we spoke about, the new OHASA regulations and buildings readiness requirements are testimony to just this. The slide is full, guys, but bear with me because these considerations are what actually shapes ERM's role going forward the way I see it. So dramatic changes in customer demand cause organizations huge stress. Sharp declines in demand present serious financial challenges to many businesses, while those facing demand surges and resource shortages risk disappointing and disengaging customers. And there's just so much going on with data. Confusing data from unverified sources or the sheer lack of data leads to ill-informed decisions, escalating employee anxiety, making organizations underprepared to return to normal operations, thereby risking future growth. Businesses might very well be taking a conservative approach to risks, looking at short-term recovery actions, and thus fail to capitalize on long-term opportunities that this scenario presents. Because every scenario presents opportunities, right? Even a crisis, we've got to see the opportunities in that. An increase and change in operational risk due to services provided off-site and an increasing reliance on IT systems and controls. And John spoke to this just now in his slides. And at Santam, operationally, we've seen cyber risk, IT security, and business continuity jump up in ranking on our risk thermometer. And even though there is robust focus on these risks from all assurance teams as well as first-line operating management, the probability of incidents remains high while we navigate this uncertain period we find ourselves in. So we have to be conscious of that. Again, data, transferring of data and the risk of data theft, including confidential client info, is increased. Vulnerability caused by systems and controls that are not sophisticated enough to prevent hacking and to detect fraud. We've seen, we envisage an increase in fraud as well, and it's shown itself on our risk thermometer again at Santam. Credit insurers will face an immediate drop-off in new clients, and short-term insurers a reduction in required coverage and thus premiums, an increase in death claims together with a possible increase in unpaid premiums. Underwriting decisions on life insurers might be outdated. The loss of value in listed investments and potential future investment returns that could impact negatively on solvency cap requirements. And last, but certainly not least, regulatory changes and design that will have a huge impact on future, in fact, not just future operations, but current operations. I mean, we see every time the president delivers his update on the proverbial Thursday evening or Sunday evening, it generally comes with a directive and a resultant policy that we have to scramble and comply with. So increased pressure on operations and operational risk. So that was a whole lot, the key considerations, and these are not the whole extent of it. This whole world is unfolding literally as we speak. But what is then the role of ERM in this new normal? I mean, as ERM teams, and I certainly am no different, I had to do it at Santam as well. How do we foresee, or what do we see as our value add in this new normal? Now that we understand what this landscape looks like, how will we play a value adding role in this new reality? The primary role of ERM will still remain to create and protect stakeholder value. And now more than ever, this is required. It's never been more relevant than now, actually, given the way our world is currently changing. There are basic principles of risk management that will define successful ERM teams. And if I look at our journey at Santam and how the role of ERM has evolved since the start of this crisis and the following lockdown, and how we've had to keep things together, I've identified these principles that I believe is the how and the approach in terms of delivering on our role. We need to always be identifying risks. If there's ever a need to be proactive, it's now. In whatever efforts we make towards that is going to be value adding. And fostering agility, one of my favorites. We have to think about people and use and support our people in the business. Business continuity cannot be an afterthought. As human beings, we always think and believe that a crisis is never going to happen. It's innate, it's human nature. And the learning that we surely must take from this is that continuity is the biggest operational risk. We need to ensure that we have continuity measures in place, that it's not a static approach any longer. It needs to be living, it needs to be robust, it needs to be embedded in every single person in our organizations. We can't do this alone. We have to have effective combined assurance models in place, or if technically we don't have CAMs in place, we must at least have an approach where we give assurance to the board from an integrated perspective. And so what audit is saying is aligned to what ERM is saying, is aligned to what QA functions within the business are saying. And in that way, the board will be able to make effective decisions, which is ultimately our role, right? We have to support the board in decision making. And last, but certainly not least, probably the most important these days in these uncertain times, is focusing on our reputation. I'm going to go into each of these a little bit now and talk to it while you see the detail on the slides. The first one, risk identification. So organizations use risk management to predict the unpredictable. To navigate the risks and opportunities associated with the pandemic, it is critical to first identify what those risks are. Indeed, the exceptional circumstances surrounding COVID-19 may have brought to light risks you have not yet discovered, or may have imbued previously identified risks with a new sense of urgency. Whatever the case may be, before moving in any one direction, take a moment to catalog the risks your company may face over the next month, 3 months, 6 months, 9 months, a year. In order to accomplish this most effectively, ERM will play a role in helping teams consider all kinds of risks, and these include all kinds of risks, so operational, strategic, financial, reputation, to name a few. Information must be gathered from all employee levels and from a large cross-section of stakeholders. They might be in a position to identify risks that you would not think of. We need to be looking at other organizations now more than ever in South Africa and abroad, and consider what they are facing. Their risks might be the same as yours, or perhaps their risks will create risks for you down the line. If you think supply chains, for example, we need to dig deep into this exercise before moving on and return to it often over the next year, 2 years, 5 years, so that we can update risk profiles as the world progresses through these uncertain times. Risk workshops should push business to think of ways to leverage digital applications to mitigate future risks that threaten business continuity. This is, like we all have been saying, critical. A multidisciplined approach will be required to reduce the risks, taking into account the interrelatedness of risks, as alluded to above as well. And that's why we need to keep abreast of what other companies are doing here and worldwide. Something that we are actively doing at Santam, all outsourced service agreements must be scrutinized to ensure that a change in operations doesn't expose the insurer to any external unidentified risks. The loss of business, drop off in premiums, change in risk profile, and loss of investment value should be addressed by the head of the actuarial function. New models, like we've heard from earlier speakers, and various stress scenarios need to be modeled to enable management and the board to make informed decisions. What insurers should take away from the current situation is how the over-reliance on direct traditional sales channels and insufficient technological advancements can have crippling effects on the business's risk profile. Consensus on what type of risks and how much risk the company is willing to take is critical, and ERM teams will continue to monitor risk appetite thresholds and ensure a robust risk appetite monitoring process. And again, last but certainly not least, ERM must ensure that business leaders understand what actions they should prioritize and avoid. This is the support that I see us bringing to first-line operating management. So an agile approach is key to everything. And I think what the COVID crisis has taught us is that if you're not agile, you're not going to make it, right? A quote that I particularly like is from Albert Einstein, where he said, "Learn from yesterday, live for today, hope for tomorrow. The important thing is not to stop questioning." And I see myself as a glass half full person. We have to see opportunity in everything and change and become better. And the world is collectively questioning everything as we navigate a new normal. The plans that you had 2 months ago are no longer appropriate, feasible, or realistic for today. If I think about us starting off 2020 and submitting plans to the board on, what we want to deliver for this year, it was literally changed the next month when COVID happened, and we've had to adapt. We've had to change plans. ERM teams will guide or should guide operational teams in redefining their plans and prepare the business to be uncomfortable. That sounds weird, but COVID-19 has taught us that being able to adapt quickly is now anything but a nice to have. We have been flung out of our comfort zones, and only those who are capable of thriving in a constant state of change will survive and flourish. We need to navigate this period with flexibility and understanding, with a creative approach. We will have to listen to what our stakeholders want and need and consider how we can pivot to fill a void. We must encourage business unit leaders to plan for alternative employment models and digital technologies once again. And supporting business teams remain critical by assisting in breaking through the red tape, enabling faster decision making, and changing traditional ways of work. And of course, the backbone of every organization lies in its people. Today, people are stressed, tired, taxed, scared, and preoccupied. The organizational risks associated with mismanaging your employees in this time can be significant. Think health and safety, financial, reputational, legal, operational, and so many more. Where then do we start? People generally need to feel heard. They need to be able to trust, and they need to have information. ERM will continue to engage with employees. Let them know, that we have risk plans in place, business continuity plans, crisis plans, and take the time to communicate what each plan entails and see how it will evolve, while also seeking their engagement and input. ERM works, or will only work, when it fosters and relies upon a holistic approach to identifying, analyzing, evaluating, and treating risk. While it has to be fully endorsed and supported by leadership, it must involve the entire organization in order to succeed. ERM also encourages frequent communication between all levels of the organization, which in turn leads to greater transparency and trust. And this is a key role that ERM will continue to play in the new normal. As we move through this pandemic, we see too that heroes come in all uniforms, from our delivery drivers to the cleaners, to grocery store clerks, to the health professionals. The heroes within our organizations will also come in all roles. Consider how you can make their days easier in order for them to be more physically and mentally able to help you. Whether it is implementing flexible work hours or ensuring that they have a computer at home, it starts with asking them what they need to do their jobs effectively during these unprecedented times. And of course, embedding business continuity. The purpose of continuity is to ensure, or business continuity is to ensure, that an organization is able to survive a critical incident. It consists of a series of plans implemented over phases to shorten recovery time and mitigate impact. ERM teams the world over right now are evaluating the impact of COVID-19 on their organizations and looking both internally and externally. Internally involves identifying business critical functions, equipment and employees, and determining how, where, and by whom critical services are provided. There's so many things we need to consider that we've done since the onset of the crisis and since lockdown, for example. Considering suspending non-essential work to reduce risk exposure, to support social distancing, and to reduce unnecessary cash expenditures. Ensure you carefully monitor employee availability, health, and safety. As all people are at risk of being personally impacted by COVID-19, a continuity plan must be developed for all business critical employees that can be easily triggered should they become indisposed. If we look externally, like I said earlier, this requires a supply chain analysis and an assessment of the possible risks faced by vendors, manufacturers, suppliers, distributors, purchasers, and all organizations and stakeholders that you interact with and rely upon. Amid government restrictions and instructions to stay home, the use of technology is exceptionally important for many organizations. Most have already mobilized an infrastructure to support remote working. To increase productivity and reduce interruption, ensure that employees have the necessary hardware, software, equipment, and internet connectivity to work safely and efficiently from home. ERM must also ensure that IT infrastructure can support the increased pressure from a significant portion of your team working from home. The new normal has created the need for new policies and procedures. Remote working world has greatly increased the risk for cyber attacks, like we've heard earlier, phishing, and fraud. Employees must be aware of these risks and trained on the new policies pertaining to the use of technology and transfer of information and funds. If employees remain on-site to work, organizations will need to address health and safety concerns through new and evolving policies. These are all the elements that ERM and specifically continuity teams have been involved in since the onset of the crisis, and we were no different at Santam. Internal and external communication plans need to be considered. Updates need to be communicated to stakeholders in real time. The situation is constantly evolving, and appropriate measures need to be implemented such that communication can be disseminated immediately. Business continuity is a whole world, I promise you. And consult and collaboration. I mean, this is the time where everyone needs to work together. No single person or team will be able to navigate a business through this pandemic successfully on its own. There's just too much to think about and cover. There's no better time to call on your combined assurance model and get a bird's eye view of who is covering what, where your potential exposures lie, etc. Combined assurance ensures that there is adequate and effective oversight in place for all key risks. ERM teams are adept at facilitating brainstorming sessions with all assurance players to be able to give a view on assurance gaps so that prioritization plans can be put in place. We have seen through this crisis how internal audit functions, and our audit function at Santam has been no different, where they've stepped in to play consultative roles in assessing current controls and providing guidance and best practice insights on how these can be made better. Pooling together crisis teams is a good example of a combined assurance approach, where different role players are able to engage and provide solutions faster and better than delivering alone. There's so many benefits to combined assurance, and why it is so relevant now is because capacity is strapped. We're in a crisis. Operations is shaky. We need to all be contributing as much to the big picture as possible as a team, so that resources are not wasted. They're used effectively. They're used efficiently. And I think the one thing we can definitely learn from COVID-19 is that we can be using resources more efficiently. We've been forced to do so in this crisis, and so far we've succeeded. And of course, lastly, but certainly not least, consider your reputation. The success stories of COVID-19 will be the people and organizations whose reputation was improved for their response to the pandemic. When the dust settles, we'll remember those executives who gave up their salaries in 2020 and those teams and individuals donating to the greater good. We will also remember the many companies that redeployed their entire workforce and production capabilities to create and produce personal protective equipment for frontline workers, hand sanitizers for health professionals, technology to help track the spread of the disease. For those organizations that take a short-sighted view of the pandemic, like price cutting or supply hoarding, the long-term negative reputational impact may far outweigh the short-term benefits experienced. What this looks like, so ERM teams and ours is like everybody else at Santam. If I were to present what this view looked like to leadership, this is how we plot it on a plan. All your plans need to align to your strategy, and the most importantly here is really that you need to be prepared to be agile, and you need to be prepared for your plans to get thrown out, and think on the spot and change it as you go along. And I'm about to conclude, Simon. So at the onset of this pandemic, sorry guys, there we are. We were scared. We went into denial. We literally didn't know what to do. We bargained. But we adapted, and we learned that things can be done differently. COVID-19 is testimony to the fact that we are resilient and we can be so much more efficient. And I am excited to be part of this new journey where we carve out our new world of work. It's been inspiring and humbling to be part of a team that has had to dig deep, and we've had to dig deep constantly, like so many other ordinary people out there who stepped in and forged their way through this crisis. It really is humbling thinking about that. And if I think in concluding that there's never been a more opportune time for ERM functions to exert their influence on leadership and business. As an ERM department at Santam, we've been intrinsically involved in a number of activities to enable and support our first line. We are ideally situated structurally to continue to lead the change through this crisis and beyond. And I am very excited actually navigating forward post-COVID into this new reality. Thank you, everybody. I think I went slightly over, Simon. My apologies. Thank you.
Thank you. Thanks, Nazrin. I think we gave you a little bit of extra time there for the technical difficulties we had at the last session. But thank you for a very insightful. Thanks for a very insightful presentation. So, look, our new normal has really paved the way for greater digitalization, and it gives me great pleasure to someone I've known for many years. Craig Oliphie, the Chief Technical Officer at Genesis Technologies, to take us through this. Over to you, Craig.
Thank you, Simon. All right, guys. I think firstly, it's great to be part of InsureTalk number 4. Really excited to be part of the initiative. So yeah, I think really what I'd like to cover today is some of my thoughts around the rise of digitalization in the insurance world, and what I guess we all referring to in the previous speakers as well is the new normal. And things have really changed over the last few months. And what does that mean for insurance companies? Specifically, the ability to service our customers in new ways supported by digitalization. So I'll cover the points on the agenda. I did drop that the one image on there, which is the digital helix. And it's a great book by Michael Gale, if any of you have a chance to read it. And it really helps to target correct use cases for digital enablements, rather than just using digital capabilities or technology for the sake of it. So it's about finding that sweet spot in the middle that really adds value and makes a difference to organizations out there. So new normal, how has it really impacted us? And I've got a couple of points here. I think, from a pandemic perspective, it has really affected all of our lives in lots of different ways, from different ways of interacting. I think remote working came about where immediately we had to support people working remotely, setting up home offices, balancing home life with work life, online meetings rather than face-to-face meetings. And myself personally, I found that my days have been jam-packed from 7 in the morning until 6 at night with back-to-back meetings. And I think in the previous InsureTalk, my colleague Andre Symes mentioned that potentially looking at reducing meetings from half an hour to 25 minutes or down to 45 minutes to actually create a bit of a balance in your day that you can get up between meetings and walk around and kind of not be stuck in the meetings the whole day. I think it's also impacted mental health massively, with people not being able to interact with other people in a physical way. I think also how we purchase. If you look at what before we would go down to malls and purchase goods, where now everything's pivoted to online purchases. Courier businesses have had to step up in order to deliver, and really everyone trying to mitigate their risk from that perspective. I think also how we socialize. I think majority of you, specifically myself, have ended up being in virtual Zoom drinks on Friday nights with your friends, participating in quiz nights and playing Cards Against Humanity and poker and family reunions. And it's really changed the way we do interact. But I think specifically from an insurance perspective, I think it's also changed the way customers are looking for new covers out there to protect risk and perceived risk and review current covers, which drives a lot of this digital capability that I'm going to touch on a bit later in the talk. But I think for me, this is driving an emergence of a new consumer out there, one potentially that is quite financially constrained, given a lot of the unemployment scenarios, more advanced consumers that are looking to use digital technologies to interact, and different decision making, and I think also just different generations. And I think all of us need to look at, from a digital capability perspective, how do we support that, going forward within the new world. And I do also think that it's been a forced change, which I think is going to be with us for some time, post the actual lockdown and pandemic situation. So what I see as the COVID-19 effects specifically impact on the insurance industry, and some of the previous speakers spoke quite a bit to it. But I think insurance is really, it has massive advantages in the ability to protect against financial impacts of the pandemic. I think if you look at travel insurance, you look at health insurance, business interruption. Just this morning, I was forwarded a petition from one of our neighbor groups where they're kind of lobbying to get insurers to pay sensible compensation for business interruption claims in the in the tourism space. So, so many sectors out there have been impacted massively, and correct insurance and kind of building up that knowledge really adds a lot of value. I think we've also seen lots of insurers coming to the party around abilities to have flexible payment terms or payment holidays, and even reduction in premiums. I think the motor insurance space is a very valid area where people are not driving as much as possible, so the risk reduces, and be able to pass some of that benefit and relief onto customers. I guess what we've also seen though is that wherever there is concerns, there's opportunity, and I think there's a lot of opportunity around innovating insurance products out there. And one of our customers, Generic Insurance, over the last week launched a brand new product called Pandemic Shield, which never existed before COVID. And that really covers a daily payout as well as hospitalization costs. So it allows opportunities to launch new insurance products and capabilities out there. I think we've also heard quite a bit around cyber, and having our staff working remotely poses a massive cyber risk, and I think companies out there need to make sure that we protect against that. And I guess with everybody working remotely, there's also a lot of increased volume of interaction. And now with people working remotely, how do companies deal with that? additional claims coming in, queries around cover, and how do we manage that in the world of a remote workforce. So for me, I think looking at customer service as a whole, there's 6 core principles, and this is courtesy of KPMG. They've done a lot of evaluation into customer experience over the last 10 years across 3,000 different brands, and that's driven based on the 6 key, in my mind, core principles of customer service. Firstly, integrity, doing the right thing, acting fairly in the customer's best interest. Resolution, being able to respond to needs and finding solutions. Expectations, settling and managing, meeting expectations. Being able to do that really timelessly. Personalization, being able to understand customers' individual circumstances and providing solutions for their existing or personalized requirement. And then empathy, showing that you care, choosing the right emotional response. And I've highlighted the 2 key points there, which I think COVID has really impacted, which is integrity and empathy. And for me, it's about us actually taking that into account and how do we respond on that specifically. So I think, again, COVID has forced us to, or almost has become the catalyst for change. And, I think the COVID situation has put us in a position where it's driving insurers and lots of other industries to rethink and innovate their existing value proposition. The ability, as I mentioned, to rethink existing product offerings and innovate that and be able to target new types of risk. I think move more into a risk mitigation capability than purely providing cover for existing risks. And the more we can mitigate risk, the better, obviously, the insurance impact is. And then personalization of offerings. I think we've also seen that, given the COVID situation, a lot of people that potentially used public transport before have now moved to rather driving their vehicles because it's a lot safer, and being able to offer tailored kind of products around usage-based type insurance, switching on and off covers. And then I think importantly, the ability to provide full digital engagement rather than traditional mechanisms, and letting customers have the ability to self-serve and be able to engage with your organizations in a digital manner. So what does digitalization mean in the insurance industry? I think 3 key points is the ability to provide direct-to-consumer engagement. And I do believe that's going to soar over the traditional face-to-face type integrations, even post, I think, the situation we find ourselves in. I also think that a lot of people, because they're working remotely, are moving more into a kind of a flexi type of hour and time base within their day, and wanting to be able to interact with organizations at not your traditional 9-to-5 type engagement areas. And a lot of my discussions with a lot of our counterparts in the UK is that I do believe that a lot of this digital capability is almost going to become regulation in the future. So if anything like this happens down the line, or different types of scenarios where workforces are not be able to work within an office type situation, have the digital capabilities to be able to provide this type of interactions with the customer base. So areas of change, and this slide is courtesy of Datacon Consulting, but I think it really positions the 4 fields of change from a digitalization perspective really well. And firstly, I think the first vertical is around the customer interface and providing an omni-channel type of approach where customers can interact with your organizations in a digital fashion, but be able to flip to omni-channel type engagement. So initially start potentially in a digital way, and then post that have the ability to flip across into the traditional voice type integration. Then open insurance, enabling sales. So from a technical perspective, having APIs to be able to deal with standards out there, providing the ability to interact with customers in a different way. And then I think also the ability to consume data. I think a lot of people are saying out there today that data is the new oil, and really having the ability to enrich data, simplify customer journeys, leveraging big data sources out there. And then moving into models and products, and I think I've touched on this briefly, but the ability to move from a product offering purely to a combination of service and product, potentially mitigating risk. The ability to create ecosystems, and for us, this is about embedding a lot of real complementary capabilities into the insurance value chain, providing the ability to be able to enhance the customer experience and interact with beneficial technologies throughout that insurance value chain. And then the ability to innovate products. So the ability to be able to track types of insurance, parametric insurance is another example. So be able to innovate from a product perspective. Then I think moving into operational excellence, driving administration and operational benefits. Also the ability to look at different security capabilities out there. Pardon me. So security is really key. Managing cyber, POPI has now been propagated. How do we manage that? Cloud consumption, the ability to access from anywhere. And then finally, moving into changing the culture within an organization. So the ability to implement agile frameworks to be able to support agility within change within organizations and better collaborate using tools within the organization itself. So practically, how do we implement this? So from a technical perspective, I think there's quite a few areas, but drive omni-channel adoption, the ability to provide digital capabilities online, pardon me, conversational user interfaces like chatbots, ability to access mobile networks, human ability to self-service, and then simplify the journey, provide the ability for customers to log on in a digital manner and quote and bind, inquire, change policies, ability to claim, register, track claims, and then the ability to enrich data. And then finally, moving on, I guess, to ecosystems, providing the capabilities of like-minded technology to enhance the entire insurance value chain. And then finally, from a product personalization perspective, is be able to provide the best tailored solution to a customer based on their requirements at that time. So understand what their requirements are, and from a needs analysis perspective, offer the best product that suits their requirements. And leverage a lot of technologies out there like AI, machine learning in order to enhance that interaction. And I think really importantly, the ability from an agile perspective to respond fast, fail fast, and create the ability to provide the capabilities out there to your customers. So I think in conclusion, the new normal for me requires us to change the way we've done business in the past, think about the customer first. They really what drives what we're selling. And from a digital engagement perspective in the insurance industry, I believe it's quickly going to become the new normal. Thank you very much. Stay safe.
Thanks so much, Craig. Always good to hear you doing your talk. I think the new normal seems to be a new normal almost on a daily basis. One of the things I'm struggling with right now is getting quite comfortable working from home. Erratic power supply is something that I haven't managed to solve digitally, but do have some backups in place. In fact, I'm operating from load shedding right now, and I'm sure many of you are as well. But thank you to all. Thank you, Craig. It really concludes the talks today, but we do have a winner of our 1,000 Rand cash prize. Can I have a drum roll, please? The winner is Petro Kutsia from CIB. Well done, Petro. The CN&CO team will be in touch with you to get your prize to you. Once again, I'd like to thank our headline partner, Santam, all of our speakers for taking time to join us today, all the attendees from across the industry who make this event possible. Emilio, our secret Josie chef. Someone actually sent me a note to say, why is Emilio not the naked chef today? I commented that I thought the countertop might have been a bit low and dangerous. So that didn't happen. And of course, thank you to the IASA for assisting us with the CPD accreditation. You will be getting your certificates and notification after the event. Don't forget that these are regular occurrences. So InsureTalk4 is actually open for registration now. You can go to the cn&coevents.com page, and there's an early bird discount. You just use the coupon code earlybird. It's a 10% discount, and then you'll be able to see the next one, which, as I said, is also sponsored by Santam. The questions and answers, I see there are a couple that have already been answered. I think the speakers have all responded to those. I thank you all for attending today and taking time out. We really appreciate it. And I wish you all the best, and stay safe and stay healthy. Thank you so much.